Hey everybody, it's been a while. I know sometimes I say that, I've said that a few times, but this time it's been really a while. And I guess that brings up the obvious question, why? Why has it been so long, Dave? And there is a reason. The reason why is because I've spent a lot of time trying to drill down in my own head as to what I think on this particular subject, why I think it. And even while I was doing that, I found myself getting tripped up and struggling a little bit, which is unusual for me. I'm usually know what I think and know why I think it. And so there was some trepidation about hitting what I want to talk about, the musical stuff I want to talk about, and also to make sure that I felt that I said this clearly and coherently. And if you're new around here, what I do, this whole thing for me is about doing fairly in-depth, fairly long form, I think. My videos here are extemporaneous. I like folks who do that sort of stuff. I like people who can, look you in the eye and burn for half an hour or 40 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. And there are folks who do that. I'm trying to think of a couple. One of my favorites is Andy Edwards, who is a progressive rock drummer in England. And what it lacks in perhaps a sort of focus, it makes up for in that there is a degree of enthusiasm and there is something to be said for the spontaneity of it, right? That by itself, it's like good jazz, right? The part of the fun of good jazz is that it is sort of spontaneous and you're not exactly sure what's going to come. There are probably a few more mistakes, but what makes up for it, making it, and what makes it sort of magical is that it isn't rehearsed and that there's something more genuine about that, right? So there is give and take here. I've decided to go that route, one, because I think I can achieve it. And I don't want to say laziness, but I mean, I'm here. People who have these wonderfully produced and scripted things tend to have that because they live for YouTube. This is what they do. This has become their gig. This has become their job. I can't see myself going there. I can't imagine anything I'm doing necessarily having that level of cachet per se. Not that it has anything necessarily to do. What I have learned about being here is that has nothing to do with you. Catching an algorithm and all that sort of stuff. Really, there's some amazing content on here, for instance, especially musical content. There are music professors. Pardon me. See, spontaneity. You get the coughs and everything. But I've seen some music professors who do some music theory things, do music history things, and they have very few subscribers. No one listening to them. And that's a great shame, but I'm glad that they're out here getting it out here because they have the expertise and so forth. When I speak of Andy, Andy will get very philosophical and can pull it off. He'll be driving his car. He doesn't care. The camera follows him everywhere, and he is able to get into these deep philosophical things, I think, cogently enough so that I certainly can understand him. There's a coherence there. And he has an ability to extemporaneously speak on some very, very heavy stuff. Wow, that's impressive. I like guys like that. I'm not sure I'm doing an impression of any of that. I don't think Andy originated it or I originated it. It just sort of reminds me of, good podcast has the same feel. Good talk radio, when there was good talk radio, had that quality, a sense that if it's not a conversation, that you're at least, in the room with the monologuist, as it were. And again, there's a spontaneity to it. It doesn't feel scripted. So I tend to go that way. And in this case, I'm going to break some of my own rules. Mine are usually also unedited. I just go. I don't have time for it. I'm supposed to be doing that. I have other things, right? This is my moment to let it all, the open kimono. I am letting it all, yes, this is good. But I just do not have the time to become a television production. No, but I could set up a camera and I can talk to you. I could do that. So again, part of what I've done in the past is, again, they're not edited. This one I think is going to be. And the reason for that is, again, there is a sense of trepidation. I'm really going after some of the holiest of holies, musically. And because there are almost chapters in my thought, I do want to take a break between each idea before I really dive into each one, just to make sure that I stay on target. Again, I've had some trepidation about this. One other thing to mention, just about trepidation, is I was watching Ezra Klein recently do his podcast, and I'm of two minds about Ezra Klein. I think Ezra is about as bright or human as you're going to find. Incredibly bright. But also just hard to take sometimes, because Ezra is a little too smug and a little too aware of just how bright he is sometimes. And it rubs just a little bit the wrong way for me. But I don't knock how damn smart he is, and how usually his podcast, something very insightful is going to come out of that. But he was mentioning the fact that we probably should have come to this realization 10 or 20 years ago when the internet first started, and some people I think have or were, the idea that the minute you are out in the arena, as it were, it's jungle out there, and there are people who are going to just despise you no matter what you say. That you are going to be pilloried, and nobody likes that, right? No one likes to. That's not a good time. And we've gotten to a point where we just have to accept that that's just part of the ecosystem, unfortunately. That there is, it would be wonderful. We all say, well, because we're genteel people and we'll all be polite. Yes, we must all have our chance to say our say, and yes, we will act respectfully. There's none of it, Everybody, for somebody else, there's virtually nobody out there who doesn't get turned into the Antichrist. I mean, it's just, it's bad, and do you want to suffer that? And I suppose the answer to that is to get a thick skin. And I think, again, the answer to that is that particularly at this time, where I think you are more likely to just get shouted down, I think it's also more obvious than ever that the people doing the shouting down very often are not doing it in good faith, that there are a lot of bad faith actors out there. And if bad faith actors are telling you to shut up, why should you care what those guys are saying? You need the approval of that? I don't think anyone does. So I may say some things that you disagree with violently. That's okay. You can certainly call me names and do all that. But I don't think I'm coming from a place, at least, where my arguments aren't being made in good faith. I'm very sincere, and again, I get no great advantage to doing all of this, other than I do think there are some things to talk about, and there's some things that have always sort of made it difficult sometimes to have a musical conversation. So this is your introductory piece. Now we'll go into the next thing. So I said all of that so I could say this. That was an introduction. Now, this is an introduction part 2. Let's talk about having a musical conversation, because that's where really where I'm going. I'm a session musician, and I'm a composer, and I produce what I compose. My background is in jazz. Was a Berkeley guy and lived in New York City and played jazz. And I'm a trumpet player, flugelhorn player, and all that's over there. And I'm still recording and doing session work today, and I'm writing stuff. I'm doing short pieces for really that are more or less cues, television cues, and so I'm involved in a lot of stuff, and I'm having a blast doing it. Um, but to have a musical conversation by itself can be a little tricky. Um, I I think people, even people in it, don't necessarily recognize the scope of it, how big the topic is. I think we have a tendency to find our particular little place and say, get siloed and say that is the world, that is music, that is because it's the thing they're involved in. It's incredibly short-sighted. It's not seeing the great bigger view. It's intentionally. It's amazing that people put blinders on it, and then it's rather than trying to fight that instinct, they run harder for a greater level of parochialism. It's extraordinary to me. I would have thought that would be the anathema, right? No, we run for that sometimes. And I guess what I mean, one way of describing this is that, I know folks in so many different kind of genres. And what I find is that in the main, they do not talk to each other. And they almost don't want to admit there is anything else than whatever it is they do. I know singer-songwriter folks, and the whole world is singer-songwriters. That's it. There is nothing else. There's really nothing else beyond popular music and a particular kind of popular music done by singer-songwriters. And you're kind of amazed that that's the whole thing from their way of seeing things. I know jazz folks who have the same issue, very often even more subdivided. It continues to break down where generationally they can't discuss their own music from one generation to another because they've come up with their own versions, their own nomenclature to describe what they do. So they don't even have a common language within the style. They're arguing over, the semantics. I mean, that happens a lot. I know a lot of folks in the world of what we call classical music, and perfectly happy to, the only thing that exists is other classical music. Look, we all like our scenes, I suppose, but to think that that's it, that's the answer. There can be no other answer. Now, thankfully, I know plenty of people who can sort of genre hop, and that's wonderful, right? That's good. And I know a classical musician. I should be careful about this, but who loves commercial music and so forth, and what jazz people do and so forth, and likes to compare and contrast. And I think I love this guy for having the wherewithal to have these perspectives. That's great. But I'm reminded of the old Blues Brothers movie from many, many years ago, where they get booked into some place that's they play sort of Chicago rhythm and blues and that sort of stuff, and they somehow bogart their way into a gig at a place that plays sort of country music and things like that, and they're like, I don't know if this is going to work out, and it's John Belushi going to the barmaid and trying to act folksy, see if he's going to get along here, and trying to get along really good, and says, "Hi, ma'am, what kind of music do you usually have here?" And it's one of the great lines of all time. I think sure it's Harold Ramis who wrote it, where this lady turns around and she goes, "Well, we have both kinds, country and western." I mean, it's so funny, first of all. And then it becomes unbelievably sad because there's a lot of that right now. I know a world of producer folks, and they're sure there's nothing else but production. That's it. And don't understand these people with their art and their whatever. It's about making money, and it's about, so and they are philosophically opposed. Not only do they make all of music their thing, but these ideas and these different little camps, what they think music is, the ideas are mutually exclusive. And I truly mean mutually exclusive. I mean in the sense that you cannot be a communist and a fascist. You can't be both, right? Because to be one means you absolutely are trying to destroy and despise the other one. I mean, you can't be both things. They are mutually exclusive ideas, right? People are falling into these traps like mad. And again, it's amazing the lack of awareness. You would think that one would police themselves and say, okay, I don't want to fall into that. I'm going to try to be a little more wide open, more open to all sorts of different things, right? It's very important to go listen to some music that you don't play, listen to some instruments that you don't play, so that you get a sense of a wider, greater, so many different ways to conceive of this stuff. And most of them, I think the truth is that they're all pretty wonderful. Some may be more wonderful than others, according to what it is that scratches your itch or gets you emotionally where you need to be. Okay. But there are all these different ways of approaching this thing. Why not be open to all of that? Why not be hearing all of that? If you don't understand, you go, gee, I don't know what they're doing. Instead of being mad about it, go find out about it. Learn what it is that they think. You sit there and go, wow, their values are at a whole other place. Okay. Maybe you'll just concentrate your own thoughts about what you like and what you don't. Okay, that's fine. But at least be open to it. You might find that you sit there and go, I disagree with this, but they've got a point about, okay, now you've opened it up a little bit and maybe gotten some new ideas in there. But that's why I think it becomes so hard. Because almost the minute you start to go down into the subject matter, you'll say something that is a tell about your particular perspective, and now a whole bunch of people close the door because you've now put yourself in a particular thing, and they don't listen to those people who think this. Okay, so you can't have a conversation because we've got to be able to get out of that, whatever genres that we're in, break out of them enough to have a cross-cultural sort of conversation. Talk about some bigger things. So that's another piece that I want to hit. Being able to have the conversation at all. Let me check my notes. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything here. I did actually take notes on this one. Again, something I never usually do. Yeah, no, I think we're hitting it. The nature of why it's so hard to have this conversation. Why it's so hard to start talking music. Because you run into these furrows and lanes. The old stick to your lane. I can't stand that. Let's get out of let's have. There can be lanes, but at least let's be wise enough to be able to sit there and go, okay, I'm leaving that now for a while because I'm going to have a conversation over here. Got to be able to do that. Let's move on. Here's an addendum. Here's one additional thought on that last thing. I was talking about everyone being sure that they had whatever their vision was, whatever their scene was the one true path, and everyone else was lost. I'll knock since I'm knocking everybody. It's not a pox in everybody's houses, but I think it happens so much that we have to break out of it. I will knock session musicians, the studio musician crowd to a degree. Incredible players, right? But are completely convinced that the only way you think of a musician is as about chops and their ability on an instrument. That's all there is. That the highest thing you can do is be a session player. That is the highest level. I think session musicians, frankly, are very close to being on one of those top steps on the ziggurat. I mean, to be able to go in there, understand someone's concept, get it, put that out there, is an amazing thing to do. At the same time, to a degree, you're still a hired gun working for somebody else who does have an artistic vision. There's not a lot of artistic vision going on in the world of session players. Now, they have to go in and figure out someone else's artistic vision and then be able to do something that now furthers that. Okay, I'm not saying it's not, there's no skill there, and I'm not saying it's not musical, and I'm not saying it's not artistic. But it isn't necessarily, there's a different kind of creativity going on there when you are the interpreter of someone else's work, which is simply a qualitative difference, really a qualitative difference, different in the quality of what we're doing. It's not a difference in whether it's good or bad. We're not making a value judgment. It's not a value judgment. It's a qualitative difference. There's a difference. You're doing a different thing. You're within a different set of parameters to do it. But there's a scene of those guys. The professional music, the very embittered professional musician guy who's done too many union gigs. Who's just, wow. I don't know that they exist the same way that they did when I was coming up, but boy, did they exist when I was coming up. But that attitude is still out there. The guys who've just seen too much and they play everybody else's stuff. Well, play your own stuff, and maybe you won't be, so likely to complain about everybody else's stuff being so terrible. What have you created? And if you're not creating anything yourself, you're an eternal sideman. I don't think that's. And again, giving it up, that's a really hard thing to do. And it is an incredible skill to be able to have. But to sit, lord that over everybody else, I don't know. Okay, now I'm moving on. Now we're going to start hitting the meat of what we're discussing here. Teaching music. I have spent my life as a musical person very frustrated with how we teach music. And let me throw it at you this way. I think my thesis, I suppose, is that the most important parts of all of it are the things that never get discussed. I remember as a kid, first getting turned on to music, what it did for me emotionally, how I felt it so strongly. That I knew that that's what it was all about. That feeling that it gave you. That high that it gave you. That was the reason to do it. It was one thing to get that as a listener, but then if you were playing and you had that same moment, that was it. That's what it's all about, right? I remember being in middle school, having to play a second trumpet part for, I don't know, we were bussed over to play for in like an old folks home or something. Christmas carols. And I was playing second trumpet. We were playing little choirs and little pieces. And there were little half-step movement of the line. Again, not the lead line, but of the harmonic line. And I remember wanting so badly to make that note just because it hit me so hard that I played it that way. Oh, God. Right? I was having just this incredible moment and going, that's it. And it was also instructive because it wasn't, right? I was in 7th grade. You wanted to play the lead part, right? You wanted to be the lead guy. You wanted to play the top part, right? That was the best player. And you were like, well, sometimes the best parts are the second parts and the third parts. Those are gorgeous lines. They all matter, right? All those parts matter just as much, maybe matter more. Love those parts, right? And I remember going, at some point, surely, in our musical education, they'll get to those moments where it gets you so much, right? We'll talk about, what does it mean? What was the composer saying? I mean, everyone throws around language, music is a language and so forth. Okay. If I took an English class, we're talking about Shakespeare, we talk about what were the themes? What was Shakespeare saying? After 500 years, it's still relevant. It still works. The story still works. It's why Beethoven still works. It's still great after all those years, after a couple hundred years. It's still great. What were they saying? That never comes up. It's play the notes right. That's what we're taught. And that's what music education is. Incredible to me. An incredible indictment of the whole system and those that perpetuate it by becoming music teachers. No, we just have to follow the curriculum, and no one's ever questioning, maybe we're going about it wrong. Maybe instead of learning note, before we even get to note, we should be talking about the whole enterprise. What do you want to do, Dave? You want to have musical appreciation before they even play? Yes. I want artistic appreciation before we even play a note. Yes. Yeah, that's because that is the meat of it. Everything else is just getting on the highway and driving the car. I really would rather talk about the destination. Yeah. And those are great conversations we should be having, particularly with young people. And I think would turn them on to music more. We should be talking about what people are saying and the ideals that are obviously inherent in some of these things. Don't want to talk about that. But I think we kind of need to and kind of have to. It reminds me of what the René Magritte painting, right? And it says, right, it shows a huge pipe. And it's, underneath it says, this is not a pipe, right? Well, what's that all about? Well, it's not a pipe. It's a representation of a pipe. If I hold up, manuscript paper back here with notes on it, that's not music. It's not. It's the code we have come up with so that we can write down the music. Yeah. But that's not what music is. Music is that thing that gets you, that power, that quality that music can bring out, that emotional thing is an enormous part of what it's why we do it. It's what it's there for. It's why people listen to it, to get that thing. But we're not talking about it. It's extraordinary to me how that isn't the first thing we're talking about. Meaning and authorship. Well, we can't have that. Now, I'll grant you that everybody gets to interpret a piece differently, right? We could get into that sort of philosophical ground. It's fine. Because I think there's truth to that, right? The old Philip Glass thing about the audience finishes the piece. That's true. In our own heads, we all decide for ourselves. We imbue things with meaning and give things meaning. It's fine. I'm not disagreeing with that. But while that's true, and it is, it's also true that you could look at a piece in a more objective sense. And we're in the arts, so look, there's always going to be some sway here. That's all right. But you can be able to sit there and go, let's objectively talk about this piece of music and the sort of things that it does. And there has been that sort of stuff in the past. I think it was good. I think we need to do vastly more of it again. I think it helps concentrate our ideas about what things mean and why they mean it. Helps us figure things out. I think it's great. So there's nothing wrong with doing both. Yes, we're all going to subjectively have our own response to a piece. Totally fine. No problem. Pardon me. Pardon me. Getting over a bug. But that doesn't mean that we can't have a degree, at least have a conversation about the sort of things that perhaps, what was going on in the culture at the time that this guy, made the music. Even more interesting if it's not necessarily a guy. Now, okay, what was going on? That there's all sorts of fascinating stuff about, the time that the stuff was written, understanding it in that context, but then understanding it with a longer lens to sit there and go, okay, and it's still working for us today. What do you think? Why is that? What is it that still reaches across the time and still is able to touch us in our? This is good stuff. Are some of those ideas still relevant? Have some of them gone by the wayside? We don't think that way anymore. Maybe it's hitting us in a way it wasn't intentioned. Let's talk about that. None of that conversation is going on. I remember when I went to Berkeley, I was thinking maybe finally I'd get those answers, and only halfway. One of the things that I found fantastic, a guy I still think the absolute world of, is Lenny Peterson, my freshman harmony teacher, theory teacher at Berkeley, trombone player in Boston. Freaking Lenny, man. Lenny was spectacular, amazing in a classroom, damn good musician, artist, does all sorts of things. But Lenny took pains to say to us, we're learning music theory, to say that, this is music theory, it's not music truth. You should be careful, of diving, thinking that there is some there, that there's this bottom line. That system by itself has meaning when it really doesn't. There aren't strict rules here, and it isn't all about this is a great piece of music. Obviously, since I ticked off all the boxes, that's not what makes it a great piece of music. There's something more than that. We could talk about it to a degree. Guys like him I want to clone. Now, there are a lot of folks there who are like, nope. Now we have to follow this very strict course as to what and if we stay within the lane, then we have now achieved music. There was a ton of that. But I love the fact that I could at least bump into a few people who were, able to break out of it and sit there and go, let's talk about bigger issues here. And I'm sure he took it from other teachers there. There were different factions there as well, had all sorts of different ideas. It reminds me of music theory police, I guess. It's one of these things, going back to genre and so forth, where with the music theory police folks, I love music theory, right? I love it, and I love harmony, and I love discussions of it. I really do, and I always have. I think it's great stuff. But I also don't think I think looking for a system that you think perfectly represents either, a cultural sort of thing, I think it's putting just too fine a degree to it. And I think it ends up getting stuff wrong. And it becomes you could go, I think it's important to know this stuff. I'm a big fan of knowing functional harmony and understanding. This is all good stuff. You should know it. You're a better musician for having known it. But there are guys who go so far down the rabbit hole and they start, let's talk about George Russell's, Lydian chromatic concept, or something. And you're like, okay, it's an interesting idea. And now judging people upon very minor differences that they're making. And you're like, okay, you could get so down this pedantic rabbit hole. Are we even talking about music anymore? Or are we talking about following forms and things and staying within systems? And I don't know. I think that loses it. The opposite, right, becomes dilettantism. Well, I feel it really much, and I feel it so strongly, but there's no technique, and there's no right. So there's got to be. But there's a lot of these, you could fall into these things. And so I just think we should be having a conversation increasingly um, that takes into account authorship and meaning and what people might possibly have to say. Maybe they don't have anything to say, and that's part of it too. And it's meant to be an empty thing, and you go find your own meaning, and that's okay too. But at least let's chat about it, about these ideas, which really, are a little more important than when you stuck that note perfectly. It's just there's got to be more to life. So I think music education is, something that's extraordinary to me, how not even close it is to dealing with its own subject matter. It's just gotten, no, it's all about, did you play, did you learn your scales, and did you set your metronome, and all important stuff, okay, to being a performer and so forth. But it's not the subject of music, hardly. It's only it's the very veneer at the top. There's so much more to talk about. All of that architecture is there for a greater purpose. The greater purpose doesn't come up. So, yeah, I'm happy I'm not a music teacher, because I wouldn't last there, and they don't want me, and I don't want them. But it is extraordinary to me what a problem that all is. Let's move on. So, a lot to chew on there. I want to move on, because the next thing I kind of want to think about, if any of that is true, and again, this is a personal view. That's all this is. This is a personal view. This is the way I see it. You can see it any which way you want. I'm speaking for myself. But since I'm going down this rabbit hole of the torturous meshes of my mind, let's keep going. If any of the rest of it is true, then where does one go? Where does one find one's own voice? How does one find one's own voice? I think by listening to a lot of different stuff, putting it into a blender, pouring out the goop, and now you've got it. You're finding, what it is you dig. There's nothing wrong with the blender. The blender is good. Blender's your friend. And I think one of the ways you find your own voice is you got to keep in mind the arrow of time. I have found it a little surprising and a bit frustrating that a lot of my own contemporaries found some pre-existing kind of music and said, rather than find themselves, they were just like, okay, I'm one of them, because they needed the coat to wear or something. And then they became that person. They stayed within a particular, and even if the styles changed, nope, they had made their choice. It is a very quick way to go out of date in a hurry, right? You become out of date because you don't stick with whatever's happening. You say, no, I am committed to a thing, and you stay there. By standing still, you've actually moved farther away from the rest of everybody, because you just stayed there. And I know guys who did this, who made careers out of it, that I guess the whole point of having a musical career was to get an adjunct position as a professor somewhere, where they got to call all the shots. They got to win all the arguments. It's kind of sad. But there are rays of sunshine. One of my favorite people, it was a college roommate of mine, great tenor player, and like a post-bop sort of tenor player. It's great player, a great guy, and still someone I consider a friend. This guy as the years went by, and I give him huge credit for this, and it was very influential to me, and has helped me a lot, is his example, is that he got a gig with like a top um, jazz couple top jazz people at the time, was recording on Columbia with top guys, late 80s into the 90s. And he could have stayed there and been one of those guys. And it didn't feel right because it meant stagnation, meant no growth, meant playing it safe. And he started to get into like world music and adding all these world instruments. He started doing projects like that. And then put down the tenor saxophone entirely, started playing only soprano sax. And a lot of people were very bummed out at him. He took it quite a bit of abuse for striking out in this direction. And as the years have gone by, and this is something I would never have seen coming, and I don't think he would have seen coming, he's become a complete avant-garde, free jazz musician. And he does extraordinary things and takes incredible risks and has managed to make that work for him. And, you know, he could have gone for the career or the this or the that or the... But he went for himself. And I have an incredible amount of respect for it because I know this is an unbelievably... He has probably the more integrity than anyone I've ever met. I mean, it's just incredible that way. Deep thinker, thinks through things. And I've been very impressed when I've seen other people take the safe course. And this guy never did that. And it's been increasingly as time goes by, you know, I got so turned on to jazz, and that's what I wanted to do. And I played jazz, and I played jazz in the city, and I had some gigs, and I remember having a house gig at the Village Gate in Bleecker Street when I was like in my early 20s. My God, not sure we were doing anything so great, but boy, it was so good to be playing in New York City and having a group there and playing there every week. You know, it was cool. And there were various others. It was awesome. And I just wanted to play jazz. Man, I just wanted to play jazz. And as the years have gone by, that music has continued to evolve, but in ways that that I find disappointing. It reminds me again of a classical musician friend I know who decided to retire because he wasn't that thrilled with where classical musicianship was going. It was turning into, we could play any part perfectly, but there was no, almost unemotional. There was nothing behind it. And he got to a point where go, well, I'd take a little more emotion for a little less of that perfection, and I think I'd have better music. And that world has not gone that way. It's about being an automaton. And jazz, to a degree, is, I think, it is as something similar happening. I remember seeing not that long ago, a jazz club in New York, a saxophonist, and she was playing everything. Basically, it was everything out of Wayne Shorter from the 60s. It was extraordinary. And then, until you realized, it really was just an impression of the 1960s. And it's not the 1960s now. What cultural relevance does it have to play 60-year-old music perfectly? What's it saying to anybody now? Who's it affecting? What's it changing? Anybody? And I think the answer is no. And that's where I see a lot of this happening. It's like this impression, jazz impression, but those times that made that music, what that music was, are gone. I think music is connected to its time. So as creative people, shouldn't we be doing something that sounds like now? Shouldn't we be finding a sound that works, that seems connected to this time and what we should be saying about our world? Not the world of 60, not an impression of somebody else's impression. Shouldn't we have an original thought? Which probably would inform different choices as far as harmony, and would inform different choices as to form, what we're writing. Shouldn't all that be on the table? So I think it should be. Let me see if I'm missing anything. I'm wandering far afield, so I should be making sure I'm staying on target here. Yeah, I think that's what I'm kind of trying to say. Yeah, I think getting stuck in old paradigms is, a lot of folks, I think, doing it. And I think we've got to find a way not to do it. And I think that's a statement of intent. So I think this is kind of where I'm coming to a conclusion. What I would like to say is, I hope, all this is an idea to, maybe there's some food for thought here. Maybe there's some ideas. Maybe you could take something and say, oh, well, I don't see that. But you know what? He did say that sticks with me. Okay, good. Then I've had a good day. And maybe you've had a good day. The way, though, that I'm going to try to manifest all this that I'm talking about is that I'm making new stuff. And I'm going to try to get out what I think is some new music. Not only new for me, but I think something that's not too far away from what some other people are doing, but I think music about this time period. Not necessarily connected to any particular genre. Let's not worry about that. Let's not aim the ball. Let's just do what sounds good and what sounds now. And maybe if it feels that way for me, maybe it'll feel that way for other people too. So I'm going to do that. And when I've got a couple pieces, I'm going to start getting them up and I'll do a Bandcamp thing. And I'll let cats know through here, what I'm up to and whether that's something that you dig and that's something you want to check out. So that's what I've got for now. Sorry it was a long time coming. Hope it was to some degree coherent. And I hope that there's an ability to have a musical conversation without getting, hopefully, stuck in the usual things that we always get stuck in. And maybe we could think beyond it, cast a wider net, have a wider conversation about all sorts of things, about how we approach all this stuff. Because I just think there are elephants and elephants and elephants in the room, and these are all the things. Well, we don't talk about that. Whenever there's that, I want to blow it up, and I think it's healthy, it's stimulating. And what we should be doing is blowing those things up. There should be no sacred cows, and we should be talking about it. So that's what I've got for you guys. And hopefully it won't be months on end before I talk to you again. Take care.